There is a specific word for what happens in the body in the 2 seconds before you snap. Not a metaphor, not a reframe, an actual neurological event with a name, a mechanism, and a specific point where it can be interrupted. And most parents who are working the hardest to stop snapping have never had it explained at this level. Not because the science is new, because most parenting content stops at "you were triggered" and moves straight to "here is what to do instead." This video is not going to do that. This video is going to show you what is actually happening inside the body, in the sequence, before the snap, and where, inside that sequence, something different becomes possible. Most people describe snapping as something that happens to them. One moment they are fine. The next, they are not. The cup spills. The homework starts. Someone says something in that particular tone, and something in them just goes. That description, "something just went," is actually more accurate than the moral version most parents reach for afterward. Because something did just go. A specific something. With a name. Here is what is happening in those 2 seconds. The amygdala, the part of the brain that processes threat, receives a signal. Not necessarily a real threat, a perceived one. A child's tone that sounds like contempt. A situation that feels out of control. A body that has been running on depletion for 6 hours and has nothing left to absorb one more demand. The amygdala does not wait for context. It does not consult what you know about co-regulation. It does not ask whether this is actually an emergency. It fires. And when it fires past a certain threshold, a threshold that is different for every parent and changes daily based on sleep, stress, and cumulative load, it pulls resources away from the prefrontal cortex. Here is what the prefrontal cortex actually is, in practical terms. It is the part of the brain that holds everything you have learned. Every book, every framework, every intention, everything you know about what your child needs in this moment. When the amygdala fires past threshold, that part goes offline. Not metaphorically, neurologically. The knowledge is still there. You just cannot reach it from inside the state you are in. This is what snapping is. Not a character event, a biological one. A predictable physiological sequence with a threshold, a trigger, and a mechanism. And this matters, not as an excuse, but because the thing that actually interrupts it is completely different from the thing most parents try. So here is the part that deserves to be said very directly, because it is the thing this audience in particular needs to hear. You have done the reading. You know the theory. You may have been consuming content on this channel, other channels, the books, for months or years, and you still snap. Not because you aren't committed enough. Not because the information isn't landing. Because of a specific structural feature of the nervous system that most parenting content skips entirely. The tools you have learned, the pauses, the breath, the internal voice that says they need your calm, not your correction, are prefrontal cortex tools. They live in the part of the brain that goes offline during amygdala activation, which means the more activated you are, the less accessible the tools become. The very moment you need them most is the exact moment they are the hardest to reach. This is not a coincidence. This is not a personal failure. This is the architecture. And here is why the content and guilt loop makes complete sense once you see this clearly. Every new framework adds a new tool to the prefrontal cortex. Every new tool is another thing that becomes inaccessible the moment the amygdala fires past threshold. So the vocabulary for every mistake grows, but the capacity to catch the mistake in real time stays exactly where it was. More information, same behavior, more precise guilt. That is not a motivation problem. That is not a commitment problem. Research on this is consistent. Cognitive strategies. Strategies that require the prefrontal cortex to be online and available show dramatically reduced effectiveness under conditions of acute physiological stress. Not because the strategies are wrong, because the brain needed for the strategies is temporarily offline. The intervention, if there is going to be one, has to happen at a different level. Not the level of what you know, the level of what your body is doing. Here is what most people do not know about the amygdala activation sequence. It is not a wall. It has a shape. A specific arc with specific moments inside it where the trajectory can shift. And those moments are not before the activation. On a good morning when you have slept and have capacity. They are inside the escalation itself. This is the part that changes things. The sequence moves in stages. The first signal arrives, the cup spills, the tone lands. the amygdala begins to fire. And for a window, a narrow one but real, the prefrontal cortex is still partially online, still reachable. This is not the calm before the storm. It is the first seconds of the storm itself. Researchers who study the physiological arc of stress response describe this window as the moment when the body has registered the signal but not yet committed to full activation. The threshold has not yet been crossed, and what determines whether the threshold gets crossed is not a thought, not an intention, not a reminder of what you know about co-regulation. It is a physiological signal. Specifically, a signal that tells the nervous system the perceived threat is not requiring full emergency response. The body is listening for something very specific in that window, not words, not frameworks, physiological data, the breath, the muscle tone, the state of the vagus nerve, the system that runs from the brainstem through the chest and is the primary regulator of the threat response. When the vagus nerve receives certain signals, specific body-based signals, it communicates to the amygdala. This is not a full emergency. You do not need to pull everything offline, and the threshold does not get crossed. This is what the research on polyvagal theory describes when it talks about the window of tolerance. The range inside which you can respond rather than react is not a fixed trait. It is a physiological state, and physiological states can be shifted, not by deciding to shift them, but by giving the body the specific input it is already listening for. The same biology that produces the snap contains the point where the snap can be interrupted. You are not fighting your nervous system. You are learning to read it, and the exit was always built into the mechanism. If what this video opened is something you want to take further, not just understand, but actually build, there is a resource in the description called Nervous System First. It is a body-based guide to regulation built around exactly the intervention points this video named. Specific tools that work inside activation, not before it, not after it. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. Here is the part that has to be said carefully, because this audience has been burned by "here is what to do" more times than it wants to count. This is not a system. This is not a practice that requires consistency before it works. This is one specific thing, grounded in the mechanism this video just described, that is available to you tonight as you are. That neurological event named at the start of this video, the amygdala firing past threshold, the prefrontal cortex going offline, it has a seam. And the seam lives in the body, not the mind. Here is where it is. In the window between the first signal and the threshold, those seconds when the storm has started but not yet committed, the vagus nerve is listening for physiological safety data. The single most accessible input you can give it is an extended exhale, not a deep breath, not a mindfulness moment, an exhale that is longer than the inhale. The physiology of this is specific. Inhalation activates the sympathetic nervous system, the accelerator. Exhalation activates the parasympathetic, the brake. An exhale that runs longer than the inhale sends a direct signal to the vagus nerve. The threat assessment does not require full emergency response. This does not require calm. It does not require that you feel like doing it. It does not require that the child stops, the situation resolves, or that you are in any way ready. It works because it is body-based input, arriving at the exact level the nervous system is actually listening to. The internal objection here is real and it deserves to be named directly. I can understand all of this and still snap tonight. What does understanding actually change? Here is what it changes. Not the capacity to remember the exhale in the moment. That is a practice, and practice takes time. What it changes immediately is this. The next time it happens, you will know what happened. Not, "I lost it again," which is a moral verdict. But my threshold was already low, the signal arrived, the prefrontal cortex went offline, and that is a biological event, not a character verdict. And that distinction between biological event and character verdict is where the shame loop actually breaks. Not when you stop snapping. When you stop treating snapping as evidence about who you are, the exhale is the tool. The reframe is the container that makes the tool available. Both of them belong to you, tonight. If this opens something you want to go deeper on, the resource in the description is built exactly for this. Body-based, specific, and grounded in the same mechanism this video walked through. Link in the description and pinned comment. What part of this finally put language to something you've been carrying without a name for? And what shifts for you when you see it this clearly? Here is what this video asked you to carry from the start. The name for what happens in those 2 seconds. And here is what it actually is. A threshold crossing, a prefrontal cortex going temporarily offline, a nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do when it reads a signal as threat. Not a character flaw, not a verdict, not evidence that the damage you carry is too deep or the gap is too wide or the cycle is going to win. There is something specific you can put down now, not the work. The work continues. But this part, the version of the story where snapping means something about who you are. Your nervous system is not a moral system. It is a biological one. It was shaped before this child existed, before you knew what you were being handed, before you had any of the language you now carry. And it can be worked with, not perfectly, not all at once, but specifically and at the level where change actually happens. The body, not the intention. The biology that produced the snap has the seam built into it. You are not fighting your nervous system. You are learning to read it. And the reading has already started. It started the moment you recognized the sequence, named the mechanism, and understood that what happened at 6 p.m. last Tuesday was not a character event. It was a body doing its best inside a load that was already past what anybody should be asked to carry alone. Not perfect, not healed, but in possession of something you did not have before this video started. The map. And the map has always had an exit. You are already looking for it. That is not nothing. That is the entire work.